Hello, thank you for tuning into my channel. We're continuing our beginner's sampler quilt in this video today. So if you want to see how to make a checker square block like this, please stay tuned. I'm really excited to continue this journey for beginner quilters. If you've been following my channel, you probably have already seen the 4-patch block and the 9-patch block. This actually is a 9-patch cross block. And today we're going to try a new block. I'm using this book to get some inspiration. It's called Block a Day, 365 Quilting Squares for Patchwork Inspiration by Lucinda Ganderton. And for our beginner series, it's just, we're focusing on blocks that have squares and rectangles. I think maybe we'll do another beginner challenge where we can get into triangles and some different shapes, but I think that squares and rectangles are a great place to start. Again, we've already completed these. I'll link them in the description box if you haven't seen them. And today we're going to take on a new adventure. This book is really cool. There are lots of neat instructions. There are pictures of, as it says, 365 blocks. And you could mix and match any of these blocks to create your own sampler quilt. There are also templates in the back if you want to use the templates to make blocks. There are some templates in the back, and there are also rotary cut instructions in here as well. So you can either use the templates or you can use the rotary cut instructions for your cutting, but it seems to be fairly easy to get through, so I hope that you will look into it if you get a chance. So the block that I'm going to do today, it's right here. It's on page 236, but it's block number 319, and they call it a checker square. And it's here on the back too, so I'll go in a little bit further. It's this block right here. So that's the one we're going to be making today. The blocks in this book with these measurements, they finish up at 12.5 inches, but I'm making my blocks a little bit bigger. I'm shooting for a 16.5 inch unfinished block. So my measurements are going to be a little bit different from the book. So just keep that in mind as you finish watching the tutorial. Now we're going to go upstairs and we're going to go over the fabric that I'm choosing and the cutting, and then we'll sew this block together. Here is a little close-up of the block that we're going to be doing. This is actually the back cover of the Block a Day book, and I saw this and I felt like you should have a closer look at what the block looks like. The basic instruction is there's a 4-patch in the middle, and then it's bordered by 4 rectangles, and it has 4 corner squares. So when you consider your fabric choices, you want to have, I think, good contrast in your 4-patch, and then the 4-patch should contrast with the rectangles and with your corner squares. Of course, you don't have to use this exact color placement. You can play around with that and see what works best for you. Now, when it comes to the fabrics that I'm using, I am going with a little different palette. So let me go over that with you now. This background fabric here, this white, you've seen this fabric in my other blocks, and I'm going to try to use it in every single block to kind of unify the quilt. This is not my personal color palette. I don't really, if the truth is told, I don't really like this fabric, so it's good to use it up in a sampler and to use it in a lot of different ways. And I think by the time I'm done, I might actually have a little bit of affinity for this fabric after I've used it. So this is going to be for my corner squares, and then I have some other fabrics. This one, these purples, I'm going to use for my pinwheel. I mean my 4-patch here in the middle. And then for my rectangles, I'm going to use this gray. Let me get a little closer to it. You can see the little flowers on it. Okay, so this is going to be for my background rectangles. All right, now let's cut this fabric up. For this checker square block, in order to get a 16.5-inch finished block, I'm going to be thinking in terms of fours. So each one of my squares is going to be a 4.5-inch square, and then for my rectangles, they're going to be 4.5 inches by 8.5 inches. So I'm going to start by cutting the rectangles. I have this piece is a width of fabric piece, and so I've already lined up the selvages and then folded them back onto the rest of the fabric here. So in order to cut it, I'm actually going to use my strip cut ruler, and not strip cut, my shape cut ruler to get my 4.5-inch strips. And I'm going to cut one 4.5-inch strip, and then I'm going to cut that strip down into 8.5-inch pieces. So I'm going to stand up. I don't know if you'll be able to see my face in the camera, but I usually do my best cutting when I'm standing and get better leverage. So I'm going to do that. And I've lined up my, the shape cut, it has a 0 line. So I'm lining up the 0 line on the fold. And then I'm going to cut in the 0 slot here. And then I'm going to cut at 4.5 inches. Okay, and so now from this point, I'm going to move that other fabric out of the way. This strip goes into my string parts, my extra strings, or my dog bed. And then I'm going to get my 8.5-inch cuts. From this, since it's already folded, it's going to be 4, and so I don't have to recut it. But I have a choice to either open it out or I can just cut off 4 here. If I opened it out, I would use less of the fabric and I would have a bigger chunk left over. But for me, right now, that is not as important. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut. I'm going to cut off the selvage and this end, and then I'm going to cut it at 8.5. All right, and this is going to give me my 4 8.5-inch by 4.5-inch rectangles. These are extras. They can either go in my scraps or in my crumbs or whatever. This is probably going to go in my crumbs, but that's what's left over. If I had opened it out, it would still be left over. It would just be a longer piece of fabric. So when you're cutting, you can make that decision for yourself if you want to open it out and cut them individually and get a bigger scrap at the end, or if you want to cut them all at once and then have several smaller scraps. That's completely up to you. All right, next I'm going to cut the 4.5-inch squares. Excuse me, and these are for this dark purple and the light purple are both for the 4-patch. I can cut these with the shape cut ruler as well. So I'll do this way. For me, right now, this is just easier to do. You don't have to use a shape cut. You can just use a regular ruler. And it basically, the cuts are basically the same. I'm going to cut a 4.5-inch strip for both of these. And then take away the little extras. And then from this point, cut a another 4.5-inch strip, which is going to give me that square. Okay. I like this because I don't have to keep moving the ruler. I just hold it in one spot and I can make 2 cuts easily. Okay, so that's one. And then here's the second one. For this one, this scrap has a seam in the middle, so I can kind of decide what part of the fabric I want to use. I'm going to see if I can get a 4.5-inch out of that seam, and I cannot. So I'm just going to use the other end. I'm going to fold it over just to make sure that I can get a 4.5-inch strip, and then I'll cut it down to the 4.5-inch square. All right. And this process, like for me with the shape cut ruler, the process is really simple. Depending on what ruler you have, it could be a little bit simpler or a little bit more difficult. But the cutting is, for this block and for these squares and rectangles, the cutting isn't hard at all. Okay. And then as you get leftovers, you can save them. I'm going to save the larger pieces because I may need them for another block. They're going to help unify the quilt. Anytime a fabric repeats, it brings each block together to bring that quilt together. Okay, and again, cutting on the 0, and then cutting at 4.5. So for each of these fabrics, I've cut 2 4.5-inch squares for both the dark purple and the light purple. Now I'm going to cut the background, and for the background I need 4 squares. And what I like about this is I had a piece left over from another part or another block, and so I'm going to cut that piece first down to the 4.5 inches here. Wait, that didn't feel right. This is okay. Alright, and then I'm going to get my 4.5-inch square. Okay. Alright. Okay, and so here's one. And then I'm going to get 3 more. I'm just going to cut another, I'm going to cut a 4.5-inch strip and then cut it down to my squares. I need to move this fabric out of the way. I don't want to accidentally cut it. And then I'm going to actually fold this bottom up because my piece is a little bit too long. Okay. And while I could take, I could just cut a square off of this. I think it's going to be, it's going to make more sense for me to just cut one long strip and then cut the 3 blocks off of it. And then whatever's left, I can have it to use in another block if I have a thinner, a smaller strip or a smaller square that needs to be cut. So here we go. Again, lining up the 0 line on the fold. And then cutting one 4.5-inch strip. Okay. And then for this one, since I only need 3, I am going to open it out to get the 2, and then I'll open it out again to get the 1 4.5-inch square. Okay. So here's 2 4.5-inch squares. That doesn't look right. Oh, it's because I cut it at 5 inches. Uh-oh. Made a little mistakey. So I ended up, the first strip, instead of cutting it at 4.5, I actually cut it at 5 inches. Doesn't matter, I'm just going to cut this extra 1/2 inch off. Okay, I was probably just going a little bit too fast for myself, and that's okay. And then for the next piece, I'm going to open this out. Okay. And then I'll cut the 4.5, and then I'll go back and cut that extra 1/2 inch off of the other side. 4.5. And then I'm going to turn it and get that other piece. 4.5. Okay. So I have all of my pieces cut out from my block. Let's go lay it out, and then we will sew it together. It's time to lay out the shaker square block. So I'm going to start with the 4-patch here. And the main thing is that for the 4-patch, the light blocks are opposite each other. Okay, so here's our 4-patch. It's going to go in the center. And then I'm going to add the rectangles. And it's not going to exactly fit yet because of the seam allowances. But I'm going to lay it out, and then we'll start sewing it together, and hopefully the seams will start to match up. So we have the rectangle on the top, and on the bottom, and then one rectangle on either side. All right, here and here. And then in the corner, our neutral squares. Okay. All right. Okay, now let's get ready to sew it together. So it's time to stitch this the block together. We're going to start with the 4-patch here. I'm actually going to go ahead and use a leader ender to get started so that the sewing machine doesn't eat my fabric as I prepare to sew it. I do have my my 1/4" foot on my machine to hopefully get a good solid 1/4". And I'm going to use leader enders for the entirety of this process. Usually I just stitch everything together. I don't necessarily take a particular order, but today I am because if you're a beginner, it may be more important for you to do one little section at a time before you go to the other sections. So I'm going to start with the 4-patch. I'm going to flip these this side, right sides together, and then stitch it with a nice 1/4". Again, the leader ender helps me. It helps the machine to grab the to not grab the fabric because it already has something that it's holding on to. Okay, but I am gonna for this part I am gonna chain piece as much as I can, but I'm gonna try to slow down a little bit. I won't go the way I normally go for the sake of people who are learning. All right, so that my first 2 are stitched together. They're still on the machine, and now I'm going to take the bottom 2 of the 4-patch, right sides together, and then stitch these 2 together. Okay. I'm just kind of holding it down, try to get them as even as I can. And even if they're not, if they don't match up completely perfectly, I'm not gonna freak out over it. I will just, I'll try to make it work. If I can't make it work, then I will have to like take the stitches out, but I'm probably not gonna do that. Okay. And at this point, you can decide if you want to go to the ironing board. I choose to finger press. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to finger press to the dark side here. And so I'm just laying my fabric down and I'm just pressing with my fingernail onto that seam. Okay. All right. And then I'm going to take this one off. I'm going to use an ender. And I'm just grabbing, I have a little basket with some crumbs in it. So I'm just going to grab 2 that match and stitch them together. Or for the sake of this, 2 that are close, because for the sake of time, they don't have to match exactly. Alrighty, so these 2 are going to work, or something. So that I'm just using this so I can pull the other ones off. And I think I'll show you what I normally would do, maybe. So here we go. Okay. And those are pretty big crumbs. All right, now I'm going to finger press here, again to the dark side. And this is going to make my seams nest when I stitch them all together. Okay, so when we did the 4-patch and the 9-patch, we already talked about this, but I'm going to fold the bottom up to the top, and you can see how one seam is going to the to your right and the other one is going to your left, and that's what we want. And now I'm just going to line up the edges and stitch the whole 4-patch together. Okay, and again, this block is really simple. The challenge would be having to line up a few seams, but I don't think that that's going to be a big deal. Oh, excuse me. Okay. All right, so from this point, since I'm not going to take the 4-patch off the machine yet, but I am going to show you that we are going to create 3 rows. So these 2 center square or corner squares are going to be joined to this rectangle. These 2 corner squares are going to be joined to this rectangle. So now I'm just going to chain piece to get it done. So I'm going to go right sides together with the square on top of the rectangle. And then for these, I'm always going to finger press towards the rectangle, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right, and so I'm just kind of lining up the bottom to make sure they match. And normally I would not have put a leader ender in there. I just did that in case you want to get the 4-patch done first. Normally I would just start sewing these rows together and just do it that way. Okay, now for this part here, I can either go to the ironing board and press, or I can just leave it as is for right now. I'm going to leave it as is. You can go and press. All I've done right now is I've pulled the seams apart so that they go the way they want to go. And so for this one, these seams are actually going to go to the light fabric, but it's not going to matter. And I'm just going to push it down in the middle here to get a nice flat middle point of my seam. And so it won't be bulky there, hopefully, at all. When I press it, it'll smooth all of that out. Okay? So now I can either do rectangle onto the 4-patch or this way. I'll just do the rectangle onto the 4-patch. Okay. Because again, we're creating 3 rows. And so this block, it's like a fancy 9-patch, sort of. From this point, it's like a fancy 9-patch. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the top row off here and finger press towards the rectangle. So I'm just moving this back so that the seam allowance is under the rectangle. Give it a nice finger press. You can go to the iron and press if you choose. That's your preference. Your quilt room, your rules. Okay. The Quilting Marine says that. Your quilt room, your rules. Okay, and then next. So now this is for the bottom row. The seams that the stitch that I'm adding now. It's on the bottom row. Okay, and then I'm going to take the middle row off. Finger press toward the rectangle. Again, you can go to the iron if you choose. I'm just choosing not to. All right, and then I'm going to add these seams on this side. And you don't even have to take the pieces off. You can just leave them in a chain, and that way you'll be taking the whole thing over and putting on each piece. That's completely up to you. I just like taking them off and giving them a finger press before I go to the next seam. It just gives me a little break in between the stitches. Alright, and one thing I like about this block is you can tell it doesn't take very long to put together. Again, pressing towards the rectangle. Right sides together on this side. Okay. Move that out of the way. Just kind of lining everything up, making sure that it's even. Okay, and then for the last one, actually I'm going to go ahead and take this off. It's just my preference. Alright, and again, pressing towards the rectangle. There we go. And then this will be the last seam here for the rows, and then we're going to start sewing these rows together. Go. Take this off. Okay. Pressing toward the rectangle. So from this point, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the first two rows together. Okay. So again, these seams are all pressed toward the rectangle, so we shouldn't have any bulk at our intersections because they're going different ways. The seams are going in different directions. So now I'm just going to stitch these together. You can, as I said in the previous video, you can pin if you like. The last time I tried pinning, it seemed to work better when I did not pin, so I'm just going to not pin it this time. Alright, and so the main thing is just to make sure that where your seams are going to line up, that they line up and they nest. So I'm just going to line up the seams, kind of hold them there. Okay, and then line up the next two seams and hold them there while I stitch. Be careful of your 1/4 inch. Sometimes I feel like mine is kind of getting away from me. So just kind of be careful. And then I'm just checking to make sure that the seam on the 4 patch lines up the way I want it to, and it's going the direction that I want it to. Okay. And then I'm lining up that seam, making sure it's good. Okay. And now I'm going to line up the ends and make sure they match up. And they're not perfect, but it's going to be close enough, I think. There we go. So now I'm going to prepare to line up the other, to add that 3rd row. Let me go ahead and pull it off and finger press that seam first. Then I'm going to line up the 3rd row and get it stitched on. Okay. I am doing a little leader-ender action here, just to make sure that nothing gets caught in there. We're on the last stage of making this checker square block, and the only thing left to do now is press it. So I'm going to press it 3 times. The first time I'm going to press from the top, just to make sure there are no little puckers or no little funky spots. Okay. Alright, then I'm going to press from the back to make sure that my seams are laying the way that I want them to. And I'm really happy with the way these seams turned out. Like the finger pressing, it helped. I'm kind of glad I didn't go into the iron every single time. I just like to finger press. Okay. Alright, and then after I get it pressed from the back, I just get one final press from the front, and then we're all set. So we can go put this on the design wall with the other 2 blocks and see what we got. So we have our finished block here on the design wall. This is the checker square block, and it goes along with our 9-patch cross block and the 4-patch block. I'm really happy with the way that this block turned out. When I put them with all of them, it does seem a little milder. I think the yellow in these first 2 really kind of pops. So maybe I need to bring that yellow back for the next block, whatever that is. But I think it's going to be fine. The white fabric does seem to bring all the blocks together, and I will put a uniform sashing throughout once I get the entire piece done. Let me know what you think of these blocks, if you have a favorite between the 4-patch, 9-patch cross, and checker square. Let me know also if you're quilting along with me, if you're making this quilt with me. That would be amazing. Leave that in the comments below. If you have any questions about what you've seen, please leave those in the comments below as well. Thumbs up this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!